Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to come to the Model, home of the wonderful Niland collection, and to take part in this annual event. I think it's a splendid idea and nicely subversive to celebrate William Butler Yeats's birthday by talking about his brother Jack. I may be wrong, but I have always thought of Jack Yeats as a gentler, kinder, more friendly, but if more private figure than his rather intimidating and important brother, W.B. Ben Kiley used to reminisce about his fellow writers and how Frank O'Connor was a bit fond of dropping the name of the great poet. Yeats told me, he would say, until one day another writer had had enough. And what did you tell Yeats? Frank O'Connor folded with a charming smile. I told him, yes, Mr. Yeats. So I've come to reminisce about growing up in the milieu of a Jack Yeats collection that my late father, Howard Robinson, made in the 1950s and 60s. And in particular, to sing the praises of the artist's agent and my father's very close friend, Victor Waddington, the art dealer. As I go along, you will see that I owe a particular debt of gratitude to the scholarship of Hilary Pyle, whose life has been devoted to Yeats's work. Now, at the outset, I have a rather curious apology to make. In creating a small slideshow for you, I'm in breach, as everybody in the art world has been for donkey's years, of a solemn injunction set out by Jack Yeats in his last will and testament of November 1955. And I declare that it is my wish that no photographs or reproductions of any kind be made or published of any of my paintings or drawings, and that photographs or other reproductions of any of my paintings or drawings already made, there shall be no publication, and no further copies shall be made. The defence offered by writers and publishers, including the Waddington Galleries, was and is that modern technology enables the faithful and accurate reproduction of his rich palette of colours. When the slideshow starts, you can be the judge of that. Besides, and this is especially true of his after his death in 1957, how else could Victor Waddington and his sons Leslie and Theo build for Yeats the international reputation he so surely deserved? If the artist enjoyed a deep friendship with Waddington, he wasn't alone. When Henri Matisse's daughter was asked how long she had known Victor Waddington, she responded simply, not long enough. Jack Yeats came to feel the same. It was 1943 when Victor, then based in Dublin, formally became Yeats's dealer. 36 years his junior, he was to be known affectionately as the Yeats man. Subsequently, from their galleries in Cork Street in London, Victor and his sons Leslie and Theo championed the artist internationally, and Leslie and Theo, bless them, have done so ever since. Other friendships were forged between Waddington and a group of sympathetic collectors, small in number, whose patronage at the time was enlightened and gave moral and financial support, not just to Yeats, but to emerging artists who were being nurtured by Waddington. People like Gerard Dillon, Colin Middleton, Nano Reid, and Dan O'Neill. the nurturing evidently extended to being taken to lunch by Victor. Jerry Dillon from Belfast was introduced to a plate of oysters. Reluctantly, he tried a couple and gave his verdict. "Isn't it like trying to eat your way across a beach?" Yeats, who was 50 years old when Ireland gained independence, had long been a prominent painter, and, perhaps in part because he was Willie's brother, was subjected to much teasing in Dublin opinion by the cartoonist C.E.K. C.E.K. was Charlie Kelly, father of the actor Frank Kelly. Yeats wasn't, and indeed still isn't, everyone's cup of tea, and in a cartoon strip published in May 1929, The Man Who Tried to Get the Hang of a Jack Yeats Picture is a gallery visitor who contorts himself in half a dozen ways before being led off to what's called the asylum. In 1942, Sir Kenneth Clarke, the art patron and historian, paid a much quoted and, I suspect, ambivalent tribute to the paintings when he wrote, "Colour is Yeats's element, in which he dives and splashes with the shameless abandon of a porpoise." It reminds me of C.E.K.'s cartoon strip in Dublin Opinion, published earlier, back in May 1930, Mr. Jack Yeats Paints a Picture. In the first 7 frames, the artist is shown emptying large cans labelled blue, red, black, yellow, as he flings paint at the canvas on his easel, over his shoulder, between his legs, and so on, until placing the canvas on the floor and summoning his pet dog, he orders the creature to roll around in the splattered surface. Frame 8 shows the messy outcome, by this time beautifully framed, labelled Hopeless Years by Jack B Yeats and marked £250. A later cartoon in 1945, I'm afraid I don't have a slide of this, shows a fat cat businessman with his large cigar contemplating a wall full of solid establishment art. Sometimes, as I said to Halligan of Paper Fasteners Limited, I feel like selling 5 or 6 of them and buying one Yeat. No doubt Halligan of Paper Fasteners was just waiting for the signal, and the rush would be on for every Yeat in the studio. In reality, such speculations were unlikely in a period when Waddington's Dublin catalogue could offer, in 1947, for example, a good L.S. Lowry for £40, a Ben Nicholson for £65, a Stanley Spencer for £85. Theo Waddington once told me, and I hope I've caught it. Yes. Theo Waddington once told me that in the late 1930s, Yeats's young friend Samuel Beckett fell in love with 2 small and lovely Yeatses in Waddington's gallery. They were £30 each, and he couldn't afford to pay all at once, but was delighted with Victor's suggestion that he buy them gradually at £5 a month. Some 30 years later, in 1969, Theo was curating a Yeats show at the University of Toronto when he got a phone call from Canadian Customs. "We have a scruffy parcel that's coming undone, addressed to a Mr. Theo Waddington, the Yeats Exhibition, Toronto. Are you that person?" So Theo went to the Customs Hall, and in the scruffy parcel he found the 2 small and beautiful Yeatses, with a note from Sam Beckett. "Your dad let me buy these on the Never Never. Please use them, and bring them back to me in Paris whenever you're coming. The distinguished art critic Bruce Arnold has written about a small group of Dublin companions in the mid-1940s and 50s, known as the Three Musketeers. Louis Jamais, the restaurateur, Serge Philipson, a collector, and like Jack Yeats, a governor of the National Gallery of Ireland, and Victor Waddington. As in the Alexander Dumas story, there was a fourth figure, known as D'Artagnan, and this was my father, Howard Robinson. Theo Waddington recalls as a boy dining at Jamais' restaurant in Nassau Street with these various musketeers, with Louis Jamais beside him, indicating which utensils to use with which course. And I too have early memories of special family treats there. No doubt there is a connection between those distant events and the sylph-like figures both Theo and I later presented. I can only recall Monsieur Jamais vaguely, but I too had the rudiments of etiquette to master. When a lady approached our table, my father would mutter RBS, and the family would all move politely to the mode raise bottom slightly. I still remember with affection the dapper Serge Philipson, often to be encountered in the vicinity of his beloved National Gallery. The Légion d'honneur in his buttonhole, adding glamour and mystery. Raising his hat courteously, he would first ask, "How's Dad?" and thereafter chatted about subjects dear to his heart. Early snuff boxes, minor Dutch painters, some exhibition newly opened. Like Victor, Serge was Jewish and in 1937 had relocated to Galway from France, a small hat factory, bringing with him his wife Sophie and daughter Rachel. Tragically, Sophie returned to Paris to be with her elderly mother and was to perish in a concentration camp. Rachel, who had also returned, in her case to study, happily survived the war and was reunited with Serge. Above all, there was Victor. In the years shortly after I was married in 1970, my three brothers were all married by then, and Mary used to shake her head and say I was the best of what was left. Anyway, Mary and I got to London from time to time and found our way to his gallery in Cork Street, invariably about mid-morning, when an invitation to lunch might be hinted at. I was a bit shy about undertaking this particular manoeuvre, but Mary was a Burke of Ballina, absolutely intrepid. And so we spent a few hours with Victor in his office, an Aladdin's cave, being shown his favourite paintings and sculpture, enjoying his enthusiasm and his vast knowledge lightly worn. We saw walls full of Henri Matisse, Ivan Hitchens, Milton Avery, Henry Hayden, Larry Bigelow, Inuit sculptures, pieces by Henry Moore, Elizabeth Frink, Barbara Hepworth. This was the milieu in which the Yeats man showed Yeatses to a discerning international clientele. And those of us who weren't about to buy, students, artists, above all young people, were treated with a special generosity. Then it would be time to adjourn nearby to Bentley's restaurant in Swallow Street, where his table by the window had been guarded, and fond matronly waitresses would fuss over him and laugh again at his daily, very vulgar denunciation of the establishment's coffee. "Time for coffee," he would say. "Are the horses standing by?" "Oh, Mr. Waddington," they would titter, "you are a one." My father, never given to lavish praise, loved him dearly, and always described him as a prince among men. He used to tell us about Victor's early life in London, when he boxed bare-knuckled in prize fights to earn money for works of art. Despite a drooping eyelid damaged in those encounters, it was difficult to imagine the gentle, civilized Victor, with his beautifully manicured hands, his elegant clothes, and his old-world courtesy, as a pugilist. But it serves to remind us of the steeliness behind his stylish front. A steeliness he used to advance the course of modernist art in the provincial and introverted Dublin of the 1940s and 50s. Sam Beckett had emigrated in 1939, preferring, he said, France at war to Ireland at peace. One just has to recall the unholy row, and Victor was very much involved, when the Municipal Gallery in Dublin, since renamed the Hugh Lane and now the proud locus of Francis Bacon's studio, rejected the great Georges Rouault painting of Christ in his Passion, a distinguished Irish painter calling the work naive, childish, and unintelligible. This prompted the witty rejoinder by Yeats's friend, Niall Montgomery. It interests me as a well-known alienist to listen to loose-mouthed, wet-eyed, eloquent peasants condemning Parisian art for its lack of sophistication. There's one thing about the old crowd, no one can say there's very few of them left. But how important it is that we remember and acknowledge all that heavy lifting Victor Waddington did in those bleak days of the 40s and 50s, when there were few opportunities for the Jack Yeatses, the Gerard Dillons, the Colin Middletons, the Nano Reeds. Now, the cartoonist has at length shown us how Mr. Jack Yeats paints a picture, so here then are the ones my father assembled. Incidentally, they were left many years ago to some nieces of mine and have long been on loan to Trinity College Dublin, where they hang in the Provost's house. A westerly wind, he seeks his fortune, banana days, the scene painter's rose, we shall not meet again. Yeats gave them titles that were magical, whimsical, poignant, and famously decreed he had no further comment. His pictures would speak for themselves. A picture, he said, does not need translation. A creative work happens. It doesn't matter who or what I am. People may think what they will of the pictures. Dating from 1910 and called War, this is the only watercolour in the collection, but it's as powerful an image as the title it's been given. A Westerly Wind, 1921. This was one of my father's favourites and had been sold by the artist to a chartered accountant, George Tulloch, in 1932. Tulloch was a partner in the firm of Craig Gardner, where my father started his career. And he had first admired the painting when it hung over the mantelpiece in Tulloch's home. He was glad to be able to buy it from a dealer shortly after Tulloch's death. It has been much exhibited and is to be seen in books and on dust jackets. And here's a close-up. The scene is Aston's Quay on the River Liffey, and according to a Tate Gallery catalogue of 1948, it recalls a day when, as the artist reached the river at O'Connell Bridge in Dublin, the wind changed. The Scene Painter's Rose, 1927. The Yeats scholar Hilary Pyle, in her catalogue Raisonné of his work, which is dedicated to Victor Waddington, by the way, quotes a former director of the National Gallery, James White, that Yeats always wore a rose in his buttonhole at exhibition openings and usually had a rose in a vase on the table in his studio. This painting too has been much exhibited internationally over the years. Next. And here's the rose. Hilary Pyle goes on to say that, quotes, "The rose as a metaphor for artistic inspiration is here intensified by the analogy with the scene painter, because Yeats had a particular interest in the theatre." She's absolutely right, and he must have painted many stage sets. But oops, I'm straying into territory where Yeats was warning us not to go. A picture, to quote him again, does not need translation. His pictures would speak for themselves. A visit. 1935. Dr. Pyle does know every aspect of his work intimately, not least his copious sketchbooks. Here she suggests that the visitors are perhaps arriving at Lissadell to see the Gore Booths, and that the landscape beyond the woman and the top-hatted driver is of Sligo. Yeats's ponies and horses, whether in oils or in pen and ink, are always beautifully observed, a rarity nowadays. I should say in parentheses that Basil Blackshaw too has a wonderful facility for this. The Quays of Dublin, 1936. Painted 15 years after A Westerly Wind, Yeats creates a magical scene out of the ordinariness of an encounter on the quays between a woman wheeling two children in a pram and two men out taking the air. These 15 years have made quite a difference. Yeats once told the director of the Tate Gallery, Sir John Rothenstein, and I quote, "I believe that the painter always begins by expressing himself with line, that is, by the most obvious means. Then he becomes aware that line, once so necessary, is in fact hemming him in, and as soon as he feels strong enough, he breaks out of its confines." This is such a revelation about his art that it's worth repeating. Yeats, who pens a line so beautifully, has broken out of its confines. The Coast of Mayo, circa 1936. This picture reminds me of two things: of Yeats's great love of the west of Ireland, and that he enjoyed painting at Ballycastle in North Mayo. In recent years, serious painters from the United States and elsewhere have been drawn to Ballycastle by the heroic hospitality of the Ballinglen Arts Foundation, who deserve our every support. Now, the cartoonist in me enjoys a detail in the entry for W. B. Yeats in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, written by Roy Foster, who notes that the Yeatses' maternal grandfather, William Pollexfen, had founded a prosperous milling and shipping business. And this, remember, is called the Coast of Mayo. He'd founded a prosperous milling and shipping business with a profitable sideline in, among other things, wreckage rights. John Butler Yeats wrote proudly, "By marriage to a Pollexfen, I've given a tongue to the sea cliffs." The Passing Shower, 1944. In this exquisitely composed painting, you can see the rain moving away from the sheltering man and his dog, and the sun advancing from the right. Banana Days, 1944. Here's another happy scene. Bananas on sale in Moore Street, Dublin, a rare item during the war years, and a delighted street trader selling her wares. Two Men Walking, 1946. This was a popular theme of Yeats's, and from the shape of their jackets, one trim and shapely, the other less so, I've always seen it as a conversation between the generations. Shelter, 1947. This takes a little looking at. A high wall extends from a thatched cottage, and reclining on a stone seat halfway up the wall is a man who seems comfortable and at ease. A Quiet Night, 1947. In this cottage interior, light radiates from its fireplace, exuding warmth, and picking out a man standing at a door opened widely to a brilliant night sky, and a child kneeling contentedly on the threshold. It's one of my favourites. He Seeks His Fortune, 1947. If you are from Sligo, you will probably claim the mountain to be Ben Bulben. Yeats creates these magical landscapes and peoples them to weave stories of adventure and excitement. Yeats's figures might be presented as wandering tramps and tinkers, writes the art historian Roisin Kennedy, but they are distinctly self-possessed and aristocratic figures, often in pursuit of hedonistic pleasures. Equinoctial Gale, 1950. Sometimes the adventure turns into drama as these seamen seek shelter behind the sort of cottage wall we saw a few slides ago, while in the distance a masted boat is in great difficulty in the stormy sea. We Shall Not Meet Again, 1952. In 1953, my father bought this, his first Yeats painting, from Victor Waddington's gallery in Dublin. The sea in the background suggests the young man is about to emigrate. Hilary Pyle, in her catalogue Raisonné, writes, "The picture, freely painted and of great beauty, conveys a mood of deep emotion. The theme of farewell recurs constantly in the later paintings and is expressed particularly sensitively here." The Morning Laugh, 1955. By contrast, these two men are enjoying a happy, more ordinary conversation. The Music of the Morning, 1951. Until now, I've introduced the pictures strictly in date order, but I've kept this as the grand finale, not only because I believe it to be the most magnificent painting in my father's collection, but because, too, it forms part of this year's theme of Yeats and music, and explains, finally, the title of my talk. It's been shown in Paris, New York, and elsewhere, and caused much excitement at the Venice Biennale exhibition in 1962. It is early morning, and a local band, led by an enthusiastic drummer, is marching, Hilary Pyle says, along the shore road at Ross's Point in Sligo. According to Hilary, Yeats used to say, and I quote, that he had been inspired by the action of the local band's defiance of the official ban on marching, an attempt to curb the IRA's recruiting tactics. they would march before dawn when the prohibition was not in force. Be that as it may, Yeats has captured a glorious moment, and a picture not needing translation leaves it to us to think what we will of it. This, then, is the collection I had the good fortune to grow up with. It's been fun to talk about Jack on WB's birthday, but next year the poet might just get a look in, as 2015 will mark the 150th anniversary of the poet's birth in 1865. It makes me feel old just thinking about it. Thank you for being such a patient audience,